always good to visit a place where we've never been before, to see how the people do, and it's always a pleasure to find them doing just like they do everywhere else if they pretend to follow the Scriptures. Some people don't even pretend to follow the Scriptures, therefore they do different in different sections of the country. But when people pretend to follow the Scriptures and do exactly what God said for them to do, they come together and they sing, they pray, they preach, and they eat the Lord's Supper, lay by in store on the first day of the week. And so it is as if God instructed all of them at one time on just what to do. So it's been a pleasure to be here. I don't know that wife and I have enjoyed a meeting anywhere in our lives any more than we have this one. We've never been to Philadelphia. And in addition to meeting you people and others from various congregations around, not only in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, but from New Jersey and even New York, we just had a real good time. Got to visit some about the city. Baker and his wife has carried us around and showed us a lot of the city. Naturally, we couldn't see all of it in this brief time, but we've seen some of it that we've read about ever since we were just a little bitty fellows, way back down over 60 years ago. And it is good to see Independence Square, the Liberty Bell, and things of that kind. I was glad to see the home of Joe Frazier. I went to Beaufort, South Carolina to hold a meeting once, just after he had a fight with the then Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is not one of my people. I don't think too much of him. He's pretty good with his fist, but I didn't like the way he used his mouth. And Joe Frazier broke his jaw in the fight they had with him. So I told him when I got a preach down there that I was happy to be in the hometown of a man who broke the jaw of Cassius Clay. And I don't know whether they thought that was the proper thing to say or not on that occasion. I don't know whether myself it was the proper thing to say, but I said it anyway. I said other things that weren't too proper in my lifetime. But anyway, we were glad to see where he lived, see his gymnasium, and the grave of Benjamin Franklin, and just various other things that are read about. And now then, we can say that we've been there. We saw that. Got to ride the subway. I tried that about 35 years ago in New York, and I said if I ever got out of there alive, I'd never get on another one. But I did, and I got out of this one alive also. We enjoyed that. I guess we went all over the place. I don't know whether right down here or not, but anyway, we got back out up in here somewhere and back down the other way. We enjoyed that. And I want to commend Brother and Sister Baker for the work they're doing here and for the efforts that they're putting forth to establish and build up the cause of Christ in this city. There are all kinds of churches in Philadelphia, but they don't go by the Bible. You can't read a line in the Bible about many of them, except when you read about division, and I'm just talking about them, but not too complimentary. So there are lots of religious people. We saw hundreds of people this morning as we came to worship, all dressed up and going to the church, but not one out of 1,000 of them were going where they speak, where the Bible speaks, and are silent where the Bible is silent. So it's been a pleasure to be here. We appreciate the song leading that's been done. We've had good singing, and everything has been good. We've had a wonderful place to stay over at Howard Johnson Hotel, and we are just happy that we have come. We want you people to come and see us sometime. And I say that everywhere I go. I say all of you come, but not all at the same time. And I stay all night with us. So I don't want all of you to come at one time. I guess you will anyhow. So I just invite all of you to come. As you pass by, we are on Highway 65, Interstate 65, just south of Louisville. And they built a place to get on and off of it right there at our house now. You used to have to go on down to Shepherdsville to get off, or get off up in Louisville before you got there. But now you can get y'all right at home and get back home when you get ready to go somewhere else. So, again, let me say, I appreciate the invitation to come and the kindness that's been shown us. I was a little bit leery about coming to Philadelphia. It's such a big city, and I didn't know whether I could conduct myself properly or not. And I didn't know whether everybody would conduct themselves properly up here, but I haven't found better people anywhere on earth. First night, I got lost in trying to get here, and somebody came along that I never saw before or since, real remember somewhere, and he said, well, you can just follow me and I'll take you to Johnson Street. I didn't tell him where I wanted to go except to Johnson Street. Well, he wound round, and I began to wonder where he was taking me. And finally, he wound up right there. He pulled right up in this street right there, and he stopped and he said, now this is Johnson Street. You know which way you want to go? I said, yes, sir, through that door right there. We were right in front of it. So that's the way people have treated us ever since we've been here. It's just been a pleasant 3 days. And we're sorry that it's time to quit it and go home, but we couldn't go somewhere else, which we've got to do if we didn't do that. So we have to hurry back home. Be there just a few days, long enough to get the grass mowed and other things, and then we'll go down into Tennessee for a meeting, and then we've got to go out to Fort Smith, Arkansas for a meeting, and then to various other places. So we're going to be kept busy. I'm to speak this evening on the subject of falling from grace or departing from the faith, or whatever you might want to call it. And I hate to do that because there's so much that can be said about it that I can only touch the hem of the garment. I can only hit the high spots on it. I was called to Birmingham, Alabama once to preach in a meeting. And they wanted me to preach on institutionalism all the week. And I did. And I back the notes that high when I got through. I was half done. And I'd spoken a week on institutionalism. The brethren have done so many things that are so unscriptural that you just talk and talk and talk. And keep on talking about what has happened. And so this evening, I'll just touch the hem of the garment on some things that have happened. I believe in the inspiration and the all-sufficiency of the Scriptures. Paul said in 2 Timothy 3, 16 and 17, that all Scripture given by inspiration of God is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, or instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. Now, I don't know of anything one needs except the things here that Paul said the Holy Scriptures would furnish us. They're profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness. That's all we need, and we have all of that right in here. And not only that, as we pointed out the other evening, the Apostle Peter said that his divine power, and he was talking about this, has given us all things that pertain unto life and godliness. And so in this volume then, we have the church as a divine and sufficient institution to do all of the work that God requires it to do. Unto him be glory in the church throughout all ages, world without end, Ephesians 3:21. God has given the church the mission of evangelism, preaching the gospel, and of benevolence, taking care of the needy saints, and of building up the church in edification. And that's what the church is assigned to do, and the church is not supposed to do anything except what it is assigned to do. I've had debates with some of my brethren. They're always talking about what congregation A assumed this work, congregation B assumed that. I point out that we don't have the right to assume anything. God assigned us the work He wants us to do. And therefore, if it isn't assigned, we ought not to get into it. When a man starts to assuming, he not only assumes the work, he assumes a lot of other things too that go along with it. And therefore, it's a bad situation. Now, in the church that God gave us, we had an organization, of course, that consisted of the saints and the elders and the deacons, Philippians 1:1, and that's the only organization the church has in the Bible. And whatever the church does, it'll have to do it from within this organization. And then God gave the church a worship. He's told us exactly what to do in worshiping Him. And whatever we do in our worship must come from the Word of God. And then God has given the church a work to do. And as we said, it consists of evangelism or preaching the gospel, and of edification, building up or strengthening the disciples, and of helping the needy among the saints. Well, now, the church went along for a while pretty good, but Paul told the Ephesian elders that of your own selves, that's in Acts the 20th chapter, of your own selves shall men arise speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them. That's what he told the Ephesian elders as he concluded his remarks among them, that somebody would rise up from among them to draw away disciples after them. Well, that's exactly what happened, and the first great apostasy came, and there came into being the Catholic Church. There would not have been ever a Catholic or a Catholic Church on earth if it hadn't been for a departure from the truth on the subject of the organization of the church. We won't have time, of course, to go into that, but they began to have elders meet. Elders are supposed to meet in the congregation and discuss the business at hand, but the elders of this church would meet with the elders of this church, and then the elders of that church would come too, and so we'd have real elders meeting. Well, somebody had to preside over that, and the first thing you notice is we have a presiding elder. A thing unknown to the Bible. The Bible knows nothing about a thing like that, but that's what they had. And that went along for a time, and finally, naturally, there would be some rivalry among them as to who would be the presiding elder. And so one finally rose up and acclaimed himself the universal elder or bishop of the church. That's the Pope. And that's where Catholicism came from. And thus we had a complete departure from the truth. It originated in the organization of the church, but when that was corrupted, naturally the worship and the work was corrupted too. And so there isn't anything about the Catholic Church that isn't corrupted. Not just the organization, but the worship and the work. So the church actually could hardly find one anywhere there for a time, and then finally people got started again following the plan that God had. And they began to come along pretty good until somebody decided that they could do a better job of worshiping if they could add an instrumental music or some kind of an instrument to the singing. Of course, well, to have an instrument, he said, sing and make melody in your heart to the Lord. He wants us to make melody as best we can, but he gave us the instrument upon which to do it. But they allowed that if they could use a mechanical instrument, it'd make the singing better. I don't think it does. It might for some people, but I'd rather have good singing without an instrument, as any kind of singing with an instrument any time, but the fact remains that God had not authorized it, but they brought it in anyway. I live near Midway, Kentucky, and you go over there and visit this little place they have, and they got a little melodeon of that night, and they just as proud of that thing as they could be. It was the first mechanical instrument that was brought into the church, and that, along with the idea that they had missionary societies and one thing and another also established, that brought about the Christian church. And hence another complete apostasy from the church, from the truth. Because when they corrupted the worship, they necessarily corrupted the organization and the work, and it's still corrupted in the Christian church right now. But that's two major apostasies that we've had from the truth. Then we didn't lose everybody that time. We just lost nearly everybody when the Christian church started, lost everybody up there and had to start from scratch. But here we started from what we had left, and it might have been the one out of 25 or 30 congregations that held on to the truth. But anyway, there's two major apostasies. And then a few years ago, our brethren got to look at the situation again. And they allowed, as they looked over the congregations, that here's a real sleeping giant. If we can just get them all joined together, then we can do more. Well, we can do more already. We can do a lot of things, but we won't please God to do that. He's not interested in more being done. He's interested in doing whatever we do and everything that we do according to his plan. And their idea was to work through sponsoring churches. They claimed that they couldn't see, and they have been crazy about a lot of things. Maybe they couldn't. I don't know, but everybody else could. That what they were doing when they had the sponsoring church to do the work of the church, that they were having another society, just like the Christian church had to start with. The only difference is they are all members of the same church, maybe, and all of them in some cases were the elders in the same church. But whatever, they got that thing started. There's not a word in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation about a sponsoring church. That came from our brethren, not from God. He didn't originate that. He never did say anything about that. And therefore the Bible knows nothing, absolutely nothing, about a sponsoring church. But they have the sponsoring churches, and naturally, when they corrupted the work of the church, they corrupted its worship, and they corrupted its organization, and now then, we have the third, I'll not say the final division, because they're about to divide among themselves now over who's liberal and who isn't, even among them. But we have it started. I don't know what to call them. They're pretty liberal with the Word of God. Maybe that'll be all right. I don't know. But anyway, they still call themselves churches of Christ in most places. They want to be careful that nobody gets the idea that they're any kin to us. But anyway, they still call themselves churches of Christ. But that was another major apostasy, or a falling away from the grace of God, or falling away from the truth, or surrendering the truth on all of these things. And so that's the trouble that we've had in the church down through the years. As we said, there weren't very many people, if any, left when the Catholic Church started, because they all went to death. There were several left, but not too many when the Christian church started. Most of them went with it. But now then in this, there were many more that stayed with the truth than they did up here in the Christian church. And so we had a pretty good little working force left when the liberals got completely separated and started out on their own. But we want to talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened there. Now, I suggested that the church was established, and it was given an organization and a worship and a work to do, and the church was all sufficient to do all of the work that God gave it to do. the church didn't have to go out to anybody else for anything to do its worship and to do its work or to help run affairs with the proper organization. Therefore, they can do that and can do it now. And the ones who still speak where the Bible speaks and are silent where the Bible is silent are still doing that. Now there's a difference, and some people haven't seen that, between the work of individuals and the work of the church as a collectivity. And they're not the same thing. The Bible makes it plain in 1 Timothy 5:16 that in the matter of benevolence, they that have widows, let them relieve them, it says, and let not the church be charged. You don't have to find another passage to understand that there's a difference between what the individual does and what the church does. Note that again, that in the 16th verse of the 5th chapter of 1 Timothy 5:16, if any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. Now here's a work for individuals to do, and here's a work for the church to do. There are other passages that we could cite along that line. For instance, in Matthew 18, beginning at verse 15, we can read that if we get into a difficulty with a brother, we need to go to him and talk with him. Let me read that, Matthew 18:15, beginning. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he should hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. There's a work for individual Christians to do. The church has nothing to do with that. Let the individual Christians do that. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. That's still a work for individuals to do. But then it says, if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. Now there's something the church will have to do if it comes before them. It's really not any of their business, particularly when it does come before them. It's the business of the individuals to adjust these matters. But then if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as an heathen man and a publican. In other words, you can't push it any further. If you have a difficulty with somebody and you can't adjust it just between the two of you, take 2 or 3 with you and try to adjust it. If you can't do that, then tell it to the church and let the church try to adjust it. If they can't do it, then you just have to let it go. There isn't anything else you can do about that. But at least this shows that there is an individual work to be done and a work that's to be done collectively. There are several passages that we want to talk about, a few of them tonight, and here's one that we want to talk about, and that's James 1:27. Now that's something for individuals to do. And everybody that can read and wants to understand can know that that's for the individual. But then in 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2, here's something that the church, or everybody in the church, is supposed to do, and then the church is to take some of this money maybe for the poor saints at Jerusalem. Well now, some people think, some of the liberal brethren think, that when they make a contribution to the church, and thus they fulfill 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2, that the church in turn helps the orphans, and that relieves them of any responsibility along that line. But I always point out to them that if you fulfill 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2, which you have to do, that doesn't fulfill James 1:27, which you also have to do. They're not even related to one another. We have to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep ourselves unspotted from the world, and we have to lay by in store on the first day of the week also, and that is not the the same thing. And you can't fulfill an obligation laid on you in James 1:27 simply by complying with 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2. It would have been amusing, if it were not so devastating, to see the liberal reverend deal with James 1:27. I've had several discussions with several of them, and I never have heard two of them say the same thing about it. Brother Gus Nichols used to say, he's dead now, he used to say that James 1:27 and said till he died. James 1:27 was written to individuals. Well, that's the truth. But Guy in Woods, whom I debated, said, no, wait a minute, W.L. Toddy, whom I debated 5 times, incidentally. He said that James was writing about the church. So we had Brother Nichols saying this was the individual, had Brother Toddy saying this was the church, and then when I debated Guy in Woods, he said that James told somebody to do it, but he didn't tell us who. Well, now, one said it was individual, and the other said it was the church, and the other said that he didn't know which it was. He didn't know who it was. He didn't tell us who it was. And then old James D. Bales came on the scene and wrote an article about it. He said, if James 1:27 didn't include the church in principle, then the church wasn't commanded to care for orphans. Well, he's right about that. It's not in James 1:27, therefore the church is not commanded to care for orphans. I suggested the church had the strength and the power and the ability and the organization and everything they need to do everything God told them to do, but the church can't take care of orphans. And God didn't give us that obligation in the first place. And our brethren have had the awful time with that you ever heard of. They talk about who's going to change the diapers and all that sort of thing. You see, when people depart from the faith, they allow them to do or say anything on earth. Actually, the church is not supposed to care for orphans, and therefore the business of the diapering babies don't become a part of their work in the first place. Well, now I say, why would they be so divided over who James 1:27 was talking about? Well, because they're trying to talk about something that you can't find a word about in the Bible in the first place, and therefore they're confused. They're trying to find in the Bible something about the church helping orphans, and they can't do it, and that's the reason they just fall all over a verse like that. And they're divided just about like that on nearly everything else. Some of the churches, or some of the orphan homes, are governed or overseen by elders of the churches, and others are overseen by the boards of directors. Well, now some brethren, about half of them say that these under the boards are the only scriptural ones, and the others say, no, only those under the elders are scriptural ones. And then somebody said, well, they don't matter which it's under, they're scriptural, and so they're divided 3 ways over that. Why? Because they're talking about something there's not a word about in the Bible, and therefore they don't know what to say. And I had a debate with H.C. McCarran out in Texas, and somebody told me before the debate started, said if you can make him commit himself on what kind of an orphan home is scriptural, you can get him fired. Said about half of his church believes only those under the board is scriptural, and the other half believes only those under the elders. So he said, whichever he says, you can get him fired. Well, I got after him about that. I said, I want you to tell me now. I said, I'll tell you to start with, I don't believe either one of them is scriptural as far as the work of the church is concerned. So neither of them. I say, now what do you say? And he had to say something. And Brother Gale Oler, who was the superintendent of the home out in Quinlan, Texas, was there, sitting right on the front seat looking right at him. So he had to say those under the boards were scriptural, and those under the elders were not. Well, I learned, as soon as the debate is over, I didn't know it was over. I didn't learn that till it was over. I learned that the only orphan home that church where he was preaching and supporting was under elders. And yet he had said publicly, only the ones of the Lord in the Scripture. And actually, in less than a month after our debate, he was gone. So whoever said I could get him fired if I did say something was right about that. He got fired about it. Why? Are they confused about that? Because the Bible doesn't teach about that. And the Bible doesn't direct the church to put them under elders or under a board or anywhere else. The church just leaves things like that alone. And then they got into a hot discussion about whether or not the orphan homes had to be incorporated or unincorporated. When Brother Wood debated Brother Cogdell, Roy Cogdell, they were both lawyers. Oh, they was up there. And they spent about half the time talking about whether the church had to be incorporated or unincorporated. Well, when I debated Brother Wood, I said, I don't care which it is. It's wrong for the church to support them. And I said, you can have them either way you want them, and that'll be all right, except the church can't support either one of them. Now, why would they want to argue about things like that? Because the Bible doesn't say anything about that. Just to be sure I had what I needed in the course of the debate, I had written the Attorney General in Kentucky before the debate started and asked him if the orphan home had to be incorporated in the state of Kentucky. He said no. If it's operated by the church, it doesn't have to be incorporated. So that's all I want to know about it. I didn't care one way or the other anyhow, because if you incorporate one, it's still unscriptural for the church to support it. But if you don't incorporate it, it's still unscriptural for the church to do that. So the reason they have difficulty over things like that is because they are dealing with a thing that the Bible doesn't deal with, and therefore they're just guessing. I debated Brother Allen Pye once, and he made a long speech. He spoke first, 45 minutes. It was just kind of an impromptu discussion, and we didn't have any rules and regulations to govern it, but we agreed that he should speak first, 45 minutes. And then I'd speak 45. Then he'd take a 10-minute rebuttal, and then I'd have a 10-minute rebuttal. Old Brother Pye said he was older than I was, and he thought that I ought to do him a favor by letting him do that. Well, that was a favor that I always like to give a fellow. I'd rather he'd speak first in the first place, so I can see what he said. But anyway, the only scripture that he used in the course of his 45-minute speech was James 1:27. And just as he sat down, he said, Brother Grinder can't find anything in James 1:27 to prove that isn't of the church. Well, when I got up, I said, yes, Brother Pye, I think I can. I think I can find something in James 1:27 to prove that it isn't. And I opened up to James 1:27, and it said, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and keep him self unspotted from the world. I said, now, whoever it's talking about can be identified as himself. And I said, now, Brother Pye, I want to know what there's any way to scripturally or even sensibly refer to the church as a himself. I said, if you can, just nod your head. Well, he said just like he's afraid his head would move. He couldn't. There was no way he could move without that. And then I said, maybe I'm not doing what the Bible's right. I said, he's using a different testament to mine. I said, mine's the old King James, but I said, he uses a different one, and it has a different word in it. I'll just borrow his testament. So I got his off his table, and it said, keep oneself unspotted. I said, now, Brother Pye, is there any way on earth you can scripturally or sensibly refer to the church as a one's self? That's what's called in James 1:27. It's called himself in the King James and called oneself in the revision. And I said, now, can you do that? Well, he couldn't afford to say a word. He never did say a word about it. He had said in the course of his speech that he used to go out places to preach, and he had walked to do that, and that he had rode an old mule they had to do that, and that later on then he got to going in cars to do that. So he said it don't matter how you go, just so you get there to preach. Well, when I got up, I said, now let's see about that. I said, you were talking about going, and you say that it doesn't matter how you go. I said, I know it don't as long as you do the going. But I said, suppose you form a goal society and then turn the going over to them. I said, that's what you're doing with this other thing. The idea was that we are to relieve people, and he had the orphan home, which is a relief society, and he's letting them do it. And he's just sitting back furnishing a little money. I said, now your illustration is good if you do the going. But it's not good if you form a goal society and let it do the going. And I said, that's our trouble in this whole affair here. We're not suggesting that work doesn't need to be done. We're simply suggesting that if the church is told to do it, the church has to do it. It can't let somebody else do it. And so that's the way they dealt with James 1:27. It's a himself and it's a oneself. And I wrote the head of the English department at the University of Alabama and asked him if the word himself or oneself in James 1:27 could ever refer to a church. And he wrote back, and I still have his letter, and he said that the word has to be individual in its application, and that therefore unquestionably James was writing to individuals. He wasn't a member of the church. He didn't know anything about the Lord's church. He just knew something about English, and that's what he said about that. So they've been wrong about everything they've said about James 1:27, about it being some saying to one, and some to another, and some they didn't know to whom, and all of that. Now the way Brother Woods though handled it, he's pretty slick about that thing. He read that in James 1:27 that it said that they should help the widows and so on. Let me read that. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and to keep themselves unspotted from the world. So he said, now James 1:27 said help widows. And he said in 1 Timothy 5:16, it said for the church to help widows. So he said, now then, if the church is to help widows here, and over here it said for somebody to help them, and he said he didn't know, you can tell by looking, he said, well then he said it had to be the same. That sounded pretty good. And some of the people thought he was real right about that. We know that the church is to help the widows indeed, all right. But I pointed out that here an individual is to help widows, and in this passage an individual is to help widows too. And I said the widows in James 1:27 correspond with the widows of the individual in 1 Timothy 5:16. Individuals in 1 Timothy 5:16 are told to help widows. And in James 1:27, the individual is told to help widows. And in 1 Timothy 5:16, the church is told to help the widows indeed. And I said, Brother Woods is confusing the individual's widow in James 1:27 with the church's widow in 1 Timothy 5:16. And I said, that's the reason he said he wasn't sure just who James was talking about in James 1:27. I said he wanted to make that crossover or that switch over. But James 1:27 says for people who may be identified as himself or oneself to visit the fatherless and widows and keep themselves unspotted from the world. Well, they get all messed up about that unspotted business. They say that it's talking about the church, and yet they'll take money from liquor store owners to send to the orphan's home. And the convicts in one of the penitentiaries out in Texas are actually taking care of a child in one of the orphan homes that's operated by the Churches of Christ. Well, now, I point out that if this is talking about pure and undefiled religion, and I said if helping the orphans is pure and undefiled religion, well, then those convicts are practicing pure and undefiled religion, but they're doing exactly what the churches are doing. The churches are sending money to the orphan home, and the convicts were sending money to the orphan home too. And I wrote the liquor store owner and to make sure that he was sending the contributions, and he said yes, he was sending. So he is practicing pure and undefiled religion, if that's what that is. And they weren't keeping themselves unspotted from the world, though. But this says for them to visit, my spelling a little awkward, V-I-S-I-T, visit and keep unspotted. Whoever is to do the visiting is to keep himself unspotted from the world. And so, it's not pure and undefiled religion just to visit. It's not pure and undefiled religion just to keep yourself unspotted, but you have to visit and keep yourself unspotted. You have to visit the fatherless and widows and keep yourself unspotted if you practice pure and undefiled religion. So they're wrong about that matter. There are other passages that they use sometimes that they're wrong about. Another thing that they got into was the sponsoring church arrangement, as we indicated, and they couldn't find a passage, of course, for anything like that, so they had to invent some. And they're pretty ingenious in the way they handle things like that. I went to visit Brother Harold Hazlett while he still lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and I lived there too several years ago, and then both of us moved away from there. So I went to see him, and he turned in to a passage of Scripture in Philippians 4:15 and read it to me. He said, "Now, brother, I want to show you." He said, "You are not all that educated." I don't know how he found that out, unless he listened to me. But anyhow, he said, "Now I want you to listen to this." He said, "Now you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me concerning giving and receiving, but ye only." Now, how's that? He told the Philippian brethren that no church communicated with me on giving and receiving, but ye only. And he said, "Now, brother," said this giving and receiving, they're bookkeeping terms. That's what he said. I never heard of it before. But he said these are bookkeeping terms, and he said what that means is that some people here, churches here, gave the money or sent the money to the Philippian church. And here's the Philippian church, and then the Philippian church paid Paul. Now he said that's the way it goes. He said these people did the giving or the sending, and this church did the receiving, and then they paid me. The giving and the receiving, the contributing churches and the sponsoring church, and then they paid Paul. And I said, "Now, Hazel, I've got to look into that a little bit." He did have a better education than I did. He'd been to the Baptist seminary. He not only learned bookkeeping terms there, he got a lot of other things. He's a spokesman on the Herald of Truth and is now going to be the president of David Lipscomb College. So he really gone on. But I said, I've just got to look into this matter here in Philippians 4 and see about that thing. I said, let's just back up and read a little and we'll see about this. Now note that he said in verse 10, That's Philippians 4:10. He said, I rejoice greatly that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein ye also were careful, but you lacked opportunity. What did he say? He said, I rejoice that your care of me. Well, it's just you and me actually in that passage. But I said, let's come on down and read further. In verse 14, he said, notwithstanding, ye have done well that ye did communicate with my affliction. Ye and my. I said, now, so far we haven't found out anything about these people over here, so I'm going to temporarily mark them off, and we've got to look a little further. I said, as a matter of fact, let's look now at verse 15, which we started out talking about. It said, now you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. Well, no church communicated with me, but ye. So I said, it's still just you and me. And we still haven't found anything about the contributing church. Well, I said, let's read on. It says then in verse 16, for even in Thessalonica, ye sent once and again to my necessity. Ye sent to my. So I said, we still haven't found anything about the contributing churches. We're trying to find the sponsoring church here. But let's look a little bit further. Now we looked at verse 18. He said, but I have all and abound. I am full, having received. What did he say? He said, I received. I received it. I received of Epaphroditus the things that were sent from you. What they do? You sent, and I received. That's what he said. Now, I said bookkeeping terms or no bookkeeping terms. I've read you here 5 times where he said that you are helping me, and he never said one word in that chapter nor in any other chapter in the Bible about the giving or the sending or the contributing churches to a sponsoring church. There isn't any such a thing as that. And so all we have in the 4th chapter of the Philippian letter is just the Philippian church helping Paul to preach, which was part of their obligation to do. They were to help with preaching, and they supported Paul. Your care of me has flourished again, and all that sort of thing. And then we look at another passage in 2 Corinthians 9:13. Actually, I fooled around with the liberal brethren a good while on this business of orphan homes. I had several debates with them about the church support of orphan homes. And I'd always just point out that there wasn't any scripture for it, not a scripture from Genesis to Revelation about the church supporting an orphan home. Well, then they'd say, well, who's going to take care of the poor little things? And, well, that is a problem, all right, but that don't suggest that we have to let the church do something that the Lord hasn't said for it to do. And so I talked about that for a long time, and then finally I began to emphasize that the church wasn't to help anybody but saints. And I began to tell the people right then, and that was several years ago, and that's one of the things that did more in Louisville, Kentucky to settle the thing down and save the churches than anything else that ever happened. I began to tell the people every day, every time I said anything, I said, you show me in the Bible anywhere where the church is obligated to help anybody but saints, and I'll send my salary for the next 10 years to any orphan home you want to name. That's what I said to Brother Woods in the debate. I said it to Brother Toppy in the debate, and Brother McCarran, and various others. I said, now, and so if we deal with that thing, then you won't ever have to even talk about that orphan home. You won't have to discuss that at all if you show that the church can help only saints. And you can read every passage in the Bible that deals with church benevolence, and it'll be saints every time. You can't read about anybody else receiving any help. And so, but they go down to 2 Corinthians 9 at verse 13, where it said, whilst by the experiment of this ministration they glorified God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal distribution unto them and unto all men. The word men is in italics. It wasn't in the original. It said unto them and unto all. So actually he's talking about some people, them, and then it's talking about all, and so they want to call that sinners. Them saints, unto them, and unto all. So they said, now right here, this is sinners. Well, we began to look at that, and we discovered, as we read every passage in the Bible about church benevolence, that dealt with the subject that the them here are talking about saints in Jerusalem. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given order to the church of Galatia, even so do ye upon the first day of the week. Let every one of you lay by him in store. Now that's what this offering that we're talking about. There are two offerings actually that were taken up at different times. One time it's for the poor saints in Judea, and one of the times it was for the saints in Jerusalem. But what he's talking about here in this 9th chapter of 2 Corinthians was the saints in Jerusalem. And as we studied the Bible, we found out that this was raised for saints. And it was sent to the saints. And it was received by the saints. And it supplied the want of the saints. Every passage in the Bible that deals with it shows it was raised for the saints and sent to the saints and received by the saints and supplied the want of the saints. I could turn at a time and read the passage that says that. But there are not many of them. You can read them when you get home. There's just about 9 of them that deal with church benevolence, and you'll find that that's what it is. And now, in this 9th chapter of 2 Corinthians, Paul started out by saying, now concerning, or as touching, the ministering to the saints. He said in verse 1, that's what he's talking about, ministering to the saints. Well, now then he comes on down, reading about that, and says in verse 12, for the administration of this service, not only supplied the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgivings unto God. Now that actually concludes that part of this thing, that it supplied the want of the saints. Now then, it says further in verse 13, whilst by the experiment of this ministration, they, that is the saints in Jerusalem, glorified God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, for your liberal distribution unto them, and unto all. All who? It has to be all saints, because you can't find a passage in the Bible where it's to help anybody else. And you certainly can't find in the passage that deals with this particular offering that it was anybody but the saints in Jerusalem. So the point is, they thank God that the Corinthian church helped them, and they thank God that the Corinthian church at various times and in various places helped other people. And I began to look back through things that have been written anywhere from 50 to 60 to 75 years before that, which is 75 years now, and they said that it meant other saints at other places, at other times. And that's all it can mean, because it was raised for the saints and sent to the saints and received by the saints and supplied the want of the saints. So they don't have a prayer in that passage that the word all here means sinners. They'll insist that it means all, but you can make them admit, and I have lots of times, that it actually couldn't mean everybody, even though it says all. I point out when in Galatians 6:10, and we'll talk about that a little too, when in Galatians 6:10 it said, let us do good unto all men, that means everybody everywhere. Do good unto all men. That's an individual passage. But I said, now, I challenge you to say that the all here means everybody everywhere. I never have got anybody to say that yet. They won't say that unto them and unto all means everybody. They just want to support the orphans, and so that's some of the all, and therefore they think they have a verse here for that, but they don't. And so, but in Galatians 6:10, that's where the apostle suggested that as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. Now we are to do good unto all men, but especially unto the saints. Well, in the first place, the doing good here isn't necessarily talking about benevolence. It might include some on occasion, but he's not discussing benevolence in the passage. He's talking about doing good to everybody, and I don't know of any better good that you can do to somebody than to teach him the truth. And so you do that to everybody. You teach everybody you can the truth, and you'll be doing good unto it. But they say, well, now this is the church. The church here, as the church has opportunity, while it needs to do that. But I want you to look at that a minute. All you have to do is just look at these things, and it'll become apparent that they haven't got any truth on it. This says that as we have opportunity, let us do good. As we have opportunity, let us do good unto all men. Well, they say now that's the church. But let's just read a few verses in the Galatian letter and see if we and us means the church. I don't know where's a good place to begin. Maybe in the 4th chapter at verse 28. In the 4th chapter of Galatians at verse 28, it said, now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. We are what? We are children. We're not churches, we're children. Then look on down in verse 31. So then, brethren, we are not the children of the bondwoman, but of the free. We are the children of the free. So we refers to children. But then we look on a little bit further and note in verse 13 of the 5th chapter, well, I'll begin in the first verse of the 5th chapter, Galatians 5:1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again in the yoke of bondage. Did he make the churches free? No, he made people free. Christ died for the people under the Old Testament and made them free from that. So the us is people, not churches. And then he said in verse 13, Galatians 5:13, for brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Brethren, serve one another. That's individual. Then we come on down to the last 2 verses in the 5th chapter. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. And let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. Now there's the same expression. Let us. Well, he said, if we live in the Spirit, let us walk in the Spirit. Is he talking about churches when he said us? No, he's talking about us, not churches. Then he got on into the 6th chapter and said, in verse 9, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. He's not talking about the churches being weary in well-doing and the churches fainting not. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about us, Christians. And then he said in verse 10 of the 6th chapter, as we have opportunity, let us do good unto all men. Now, when I debated Brother Toddy and I put this to him, he didn't say a word about any of that. He just read verse 11. Verse 11 said, you see how large a letter I have written unto you with mine own hand. So he said, Paul said, I have wrote to you. Now he said, who is you? And he turned back to the first of the chapter, and it was written to the churches of Galatia. So he said to you, the churches of Galatia. And that sounded like he was right there. And some of his brethren just grinned about that. They just thought that he was right about that. But I said, let's read the next verse. We see about you and see if it's the church. In the 12th verse, he said, as many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. I said, were they going to circumcise the church? He said that you circumcised. And then it goes on in the next verse. For neither they themselves who are circumcised keep the law, but desire to have you circumcised, that they may glory in your flesh. Surely he wrote to the churches of Galatia. That was, he couldn't address all of the members down there, and so he just addressed it to the churches of Galatia. But actually, everything in the book of Galatians is individual. I can't read a line in the book of Galatians where the church is told to do anything. And so he said, I wrote to you. Well, actually, he wrote to the churches, but really he was writing to the we's and the us's in it, or to the individuals. And actually, in the 16th chapter of 1 Corinthians, he said to the Corinthian brethren, now concerning the collection for the saints. Here's a collection for saints. He said, as I've given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. So he told the ye, or the Corinthians, to make a contribution for saints, and he said he told the churches of Galatia to do the very same thing. So he told the Galatian churches to help saints, just like he told the Corinthian churches to do that. And so the you has to be the members, because, as I said, everything in the book of Galatians is to individuals. You just turn in and read any verse that comes to mind. I'll just turn and read the first verse I see. Well, that don't tell us really. It said, for if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor, and so on. But let me get one that has to do with the Galatians. 3rd chapter, verse 1. O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ has been evidently set forth, crucified among you. Christ wasn't crucified among churches. He's crucified among the people that comprise the churches. Well, as I said, I'm just going to have to touch the very top side of the thing, and we ordered to run past time. And we don't want to start working overtime here on the last. But anyway, in James 1:27, and Philippians 4:15, and in 2 Corinthians 9:13, and in Galatians 6 and 10, they don't have any proof for what they have. They have the church supporting orphans and supporting orphan homes, and there's not a word in the New Testament about any such a thing. Christians are obligated to do that, and they better do it too, because we're going to be judged out of the things written in the books according to our works. And if they do, well, then everybody will be taken care of. Now, they seem to worry that somebody might be left out, and that some child might not be taken care of. But the truth of the matter is, in the Bible, the church is to help saints. the church is to do that. And that's all the church is to do along that line. But these saints may have children of their own. If they do, the saint can take some of the money that the church gave them and feed their own children. So all of the children of the saints can be taken care of, but there may be children that are not children of the saints, but they may be the obligation of the saints. All right, let the saints take care of them. And they can even use some of the money they get from the church to do it. If the saint is in need to take care of his own children, all of them, or if he's in need to help take care of any other children that might become his obligation, let the church help him, and then let him do that. If that's the way that goes. So that don't leave any child. It don't leave a child of the saints, nor a child that's not a child of the saint, who may be the obligation of the saint, go hungry. So God made provision for these people. He has charged the saints with looking after them, and charged the church to help the saints. And so the church doesn't have the obligation then of caring for children. It's just never been their obligation, and there's no scripture for it. Nowhere in the Bible does it say for the church to help an orphan or an orphan home, and nowhere in the Bible does it say a word about a sponsoring church or anything. And nowhere in the Bible does it talk about the church is combining money to preach the gospel. That's another generous offer I've made to my brethren down through the years. I can't do it now because I quit getting a salary, but I used to tell them, if you show me anywhere in the Bible where one church ever sent as much as 10 cents to another church to preach the gospel, I'll send my salary to whatever sponsoring church you want to bring name for the next 10 years. Well, they never put name on. There isn't any such a thing as that. The church is not to help another church to preach. It's to send preachers and to send to the preachers, but you can't read where it sends it to the church somewhere. They say they support preachers and preaching. So I just say now, that's the issue between us. Can the church send money to another church to preach the gospel? No. And can the church support an orphan home? And I say no. And can the church support one who is not a saint? And I say no. It's just that plain. That's all there is to it. And then just challenge them to find a passage that says so, and they can't do it. I've made that proposition to them down through the years, that if they'll name a verse that said for the church to help an orphan or an orphan home, I'd send my salary to the orphan home. Or if they could find one verse that said for the church to send as much as 10 cents to another church to preach the gospel, I'd send my salary for the next 10 years. They just can't find it. It's not in there. And so the fight is about over with them as far as I'm concerned. They don't want to talk with me anymore about the matter. But that's how plain it is, and it's been a pleasure to be here with you. I'm happy to do this. I wish I could have had it more in order, but as I said, there's just so many things about it, and I knew I could just touch some of them, and so these, I had some good outlines, all right, but I knew I couldn't follow them, I couldn't get to one of them, so I just kind of chucked them all together there, and made one particularly for tonight. But it's been a pleasure to greet you, and I wonder, though we haven't been talking about obeying the gospel and being members of the Lord's church, but you have to be a member of it. You go to heaven. He's purchased it with his blood, and he didn't use any of his blood for anything else. And if you're saved by his blood, he